Today is November 29th. It's 1 p.m. Eastern time, so it's time for our Latin studies. We took a week off last week for Thanksgiving break. I went back and looked at what we were doing before break, and the last time we had class, we spent the whole class time talking about the parts of speech, looking at Latin grammar, which is a good lesson, good exercise we had. You can go back and review that video if you don't remember the work we did identifying parts of speech. But I went 2 weeks back, a week back before that, to see what we had last done in Latin reading, and we finished lesson 2 in our previous meeting. So today we're going to look at lesson 3 in Latin reading, studying John 1:11-15. Now, for those of you here, it's great for you to be in these live classes, but remember, live classes are not intended to replace the actual work of the online courses. You've got to study the lessons, complete the assignments, complete the quizzes, and get records for your studies. That's really the real work. This is meant to just be helpful. I think it's helpful sometimes to just hear things read, hear things explained, be able to ask questions, go back and forth a little bit to make the studies more comfortable. And then afterwards, we can follow up with questions and answers and stuff like that. But I want to make sure that these live classes are not being used as a replacement for the online studies, because that's what really counts. If you don't do the assignments and get the assessments, then you've got no record for your progress. And that's really the end of this, is to do work where you actually prove your understanding by submitting to assignments and submitting to outside grading, and having someone else other than yourself agree that you understand the lesson and are making progress in the course. So make sure you're using these lessons to then turn around and get these lessons done. We've been going through Latin studies for like 5 or 6 weeks now, I think. So there's really no reason why, if you've been with us along the way, you shouldn't be somewhere near or beyond lesson 3 in Latin reading. So let's just make sure we use these class meetings productively, and that you turn around and get these assignments done, or else we're just spinning tires and not really doing anything helpful. So today I'm going to share my screen. We're going to start with a vocab lesson. And then we're going to get into Latin reading. So let's get this up on the screen here. Latin vocabulary lesson 6 is, the subject is the air. Remember, we learned about 4 elements. We learned about the 4 elements, fire, air, water, and the earth. And these first lessons in vocabulary take us through these topics, and we learn about things that relate to these 4 different elements. So last time we looked at fire. I think the time before that we might have done the earth or the heaven. We did the heaven. But in this lesson, we're looking at the air. So you can see the Latin word for air is aer, A-E-R, and it needs to be pronounced as 2 syllables. Aer, aer, aer. All right, it's 2 syllables. We can see the diaresis that's marking that E there. So it tells us this is not actually a diphthong. I'm not letting anyone in anymore after the meeting starts. And we can see that this is not a diphthong. We have the vowel A, which is the first syllable, and then er, which is the second syllable. So it's pronounced aer, 2 syllables. And that's the subject of this next lesson. You can see again on the illustration, the vocabulary items are drawn out in this engraving, and you can see numbers marked in the illustration. So when you look down here to the lesson, those numbers in the lesson correspond to the numbers in the illustration. So that helps with vocabulary a little bit. To test yourself in the vocab, you should be able to look at the illustration and point things out and name them. That's really the point of this book. It's called a nomenclator. That's what kind of book it is. And it's basically a book that teaches the names of things. Okay. So you should be able to look at this illustration after we're done, point out the different items in the illustration, and give their Latin name. That's the goal of this Latin vocabulary course. And the topic is the air. All right, so we begin with a cool air breatheth gently. A cool air breatheth gently. And you notice this first vocabulary word, it's not air, even though it's italics over here, it says air. It's really this phrase, cool air. A cool air, aura, aura. And that the idea in English of that would be a breeze. Like think of a cool breeze, right? So it's not really, the word air is not exactly what's being discussed here. It's a cool air, a breeze, aura, aura, a cool breeze. And you see the verb breatheth, breathes. That's where the word breeze comes from, breathes. The Latin for that is spirat, spirat. So our breathing, if I say he breathes, the verb is spirat. Spirat. So inspiration, the word inspiration in English means to breathe into. And if you remember our study in sacred scripture, when God made Adam, he formed his body from the mud or the slime of the earth. And then it says he breathed into his nostrils. That's the idea of inspiration, to breathe into. Okay, so here we see the breeze, aura, cool air, breathes, spirat, and then leniter means gently, a gentle breeze, aura. Okay, aura spirat leniter, a cool air breatheth gently, aura, breeze. And then we've got the wind. And if we look here up at the image, you can see the wind. We've got a cool air. They've got this number 1 marked up here, and there's just like some lines in the sky, just sort of still air with some gentle breeze. And then over here at number 2, we've got some turbulent wind. That's the idea of wind. And the Latin word for wind is ventus. Ventus is the word for wind. So understand the difference between aura, a cool, gentle breeze, and ventus, wind, actual forceful wind, ventus. Notice the verb is also different. We see here the wind blows. The cool air breathes. That idea of breathing is gentle. The wind does not breathe. The wind blows. The wind blows strongly. And the verb for blows is flat. Flat. And we use this all the time in English. Just think, if a tire goes flat, we say it deflates, right? It deflates. The air blows out of it. If we want to fill the tire back up, we inflate the tire. We blow air into the tire. So inflation, deflation, that has to do with blowing into and blowing out from. So that word flat, that verb, is used in many English derivatives, right? So ventus flat, the wind blows. Valide means strongly. Valide means strongly. And you've got these two opposite adverbs. Leniter means gently, leniter, and valide means strongly. Aura spirat leniter, ventus flat valide, right? The breeze breathes gently, the wind blows strongly. Next, the storm. The storm, the Latin word for storm is procella. Procella, the Latin word for storm. And you can see on the illustration here, number 3 is the image of this strong wind blasting and blowing over these trees. That number 3 is procella, a storm. Procella. Procella sternit arbores. Sternit is the verb that translates as throws down or knocks down. Sternit is the word for throwing down, and arbores is the Latin word for trees. So, you know, in some places they celebrate Arbor Day. I don't know if you ever heard of Arbor Day. It's just tree day. It's just the Latin word for tree. Usually people plant new trees on Arbor Day. So the storm, procella sternit arbores. The storm blows down the trees, throws down the trees. Then we've got a whirlwind or a tornado, a whirlwind. The Latin word is turbo, turbo. In English, we have the word turbo. You might hear of a car being turbo powered or something like that. Turbo powered car means it pulls air in and the air is forced into the engine. That's what turbo means. It's the spinning of the air, a whirlwind. I think the illustration shows it. The turbo. Yeah, number 4. You can see down here by the ground, you've got this, look, it looks like a tornado, and then down on the ground, you can see it's spinning around. That number 4 marks turbo, right? A whirlwind or a tornado. Whirlwind is usually referred to something that's less powerful than a tornado. Like sometimes, I don't know if you've seen, you might just notice out in the yard or in a parking lot, there's just like a little wind blowing and it's spinning a bunch of leaves around or something like that. That's the idea of a whirlwind, turbo, or a tornado, if it's bigger and more powerful. So the turbo, the whirlwind, agit se in girum. Agit se in girum. Agit means, it doesn't mean turns itself. That's just an interpretation. Agit just means to lead. The word ago or agere means to lead. So it leads itself in girum, in a circle. The turbo leads itself or drives itself in a circle. And the translation there is a little wordy. It says, turneth itself in a round compass, which is, older language. The turbo leads itself in a spiral or in a circle. Okay, gyrum. So we've got aura, a gentle breeze. We've got ventus, a stronger wind. We've got procella, a wind or storm strong enough to knock down trees. And then we've got turbo, which is this spinning, circling storm wind. Okay, four different kinds of air, we could say. Now we've got an interesting little fact here. I think it's controversial maybe, but we read that ventus subterraneus excitat terremotum. Ventus subterraneus excitat terrae motum. That means a wind subterraneus. That means underground. You see, sub means under, terra means the earth. So under the earth, a wind that blows under the earth, excitat. We can see this, the English word derived from this, excites or stirs up. An underground wind excites terremotum. Terremotum, motum means motion or movement, and terre means of the earth. So terremotum, that phrase, movement of the earth, we have a single word for it. We just say earthquake. So an underground wind excites an earthquake. Very, very interesting. Now we might say, oh, come on, that's not true. Earthquakes aren't caused by underground winds. He doesn't say every earthquake is caused by underground wind. He says an underground wind causes an earthquake. So he's talking about wind. He's not talking about every earthquake. And, if you guys study Pliny, sometimes if you study Pliny's natural history, you'll read things and you'll say, oh, come on, that's not true, right? I never heard of that before. But then if you actually go and search into it and look it up, you find that the stuff that he says is in fact true. We may just not know of it, or we may know of other examples where it's not true, but it is true of the things that they talk about. So a subterranean wind, ventus subterraneus, excitat terremotum, excites a movement of the earth or an earthquake. All right. That's number 5. Ventus subterraneus. The word subterraneus is our vocabulary word there. Subterranean means under the earth. And it excites a terremotum, a movement of the earth, which in English is an earthquake. Okay. Next, terremotus, same expression, terremotus, just a different ending because it's a different case. This is the object. It's the accusative case of the verb excitat. The wind excites the movement. The movement is the object. Here we have motus in the nominative form because it's the subject. So terremotus, the earthquake, facit labes. The earthquake causes or makes, facit, makes labes. That means openings of the earth. Et ruinas. Ruinas. Obviously, that just means ruins or the falling of buildings and houses. Terremotus facit labes et ruinas. Terremotus, an earthquake, facit, makes or causes labes, openings, et ruinas. All right. And so if we look at these images, we can see that, we've got this storm blowing and the trees are falling down. It looks like the house is falling down into ruins. So that's illustrating the vocab there. Ruinas. And, archaeological, sites where they dig up old cities, they refer to the sites as ruins, right? Places where the buildings and all of the different constructions have been fallen and destroyed. And they search through those things to look for historical evidence. So terremotus facit labes et ruinas. An earthquake causes openings in the earth. It causes the earth to open up at places. Et ruinas, the destruction of buildings. Moving on here. Oh, that's actually it. So that's a short lesson. So for air, we've just got 6 points of vocabulary. Very simple. We've got the word aer itself, aer, 2 syllables. We've got 4 different kinds of air, which is aura, a breeze, a gentle, cool breeze, ventus, a stronger wind, procella, a storm, turbo, a whirlwind, or we could say tornado. And then we've got subterraneos, which means underground, subterraneos. And then the phrase terremotum, which is the word for earthquake. I think in Spanish, if any of you know Spanish, I think the Spanish word for earthquake is terremoto. So it's taken from this Latin phrase, terremoto. And then we've got labes et ruinas, openings of the earth and ruins, destruction and piles of fallen stuff. Okay, so that's all for the vocab lesson on the air. Very simple, just a few words. You should be able to look at this image and point out these issues. What is number 1? This is aura. What is number 2? That's ventus. What is 3? Procella. What is this down here in number 4? That's turbo, right? And just go through and identify the different items on the illustration. So any questions about the vocab here? Just give me a second. I'll open chat up for a minute. Any questions about this vocabulary? Any words you don't understand? Anything not clear about that, or all good? Let me know. All good, pretty simple. The main benefit of going through vocabulary is not that you can't do this yourself, but sometimes it's just good to hear the words pronounced and things like that. Helpful. I saw a question before. Is aura derived from Greek? Is aura derived from Greek? Well, I don't know off the top of my head. If I had my Greek dictionary, I'd look it up real quick. I usually do, but I don't see my dictionary. So I'd have to look that up. I'm not sure. Is aura derived from Greek? Good question. I'll try to follow up on that later on. Okay, good question. Yeah, pretty simple lesson. So let's move on here. Okay, let's get going with the next part of this lesson. All right, so next up, what I'd like to do is walk through the Gospel of John, chapter 1, verses 11 to 15. If you're not on this lesson, pay attention, because you can learn some future vocabulary you'll need to learn anyway. And if you've already done this lesson, it's a good opportunity to review it and go a little deeper in your knowledge of it. So again, this is John chapter 1, verses 11 to 15, lesson 3 in Latin reading. And to get started, let me ask anyone interested in reading this for us? Anyone interested in reading? I'll open up chat. Give me a sec. Anyone interested in giving it a shot at this reading for us? Or maybe a couple of you interested in reading. Cecilia, you want to give it a try? Let me open up your mic. Just give me a sec. Go ahead if you'd like to read. Just you can read. Go ahead and read the whole thing for us. Why wait? Go ahead whenever you're ready.
In propria venit et sui eum non receperunt.
Good.
Quod autem receperunt eum dedit eis potestatem filios Dei fieri his qui credunt in nomine eius. qui non ex sanguinibus neque ex voluntate carnis, neque ex voluntate viri, sed ex Deo nati sunt. Et verbum caro factum est et habitavit in nobis, et vidimus gloriam eus, gloriam quasi unigeniti a Patre plenum gratiae et veritatis. Johannes testimonium perhibet de ipso et clamat dicens, hic erat quem dixi qui post mi venturus est ante mi factus est, quia prior mi erat.
Okay, awesome. Very good. Thank you. Now, that was almost perfect. Almost perfect. Unfortunately for the rest of you, I think Cecilia set the bar pretty high for reading. So anyone else want to give it a try? It's good to practice reading. Anyone else want to try? Now, what I'd like the rest of you to do, if you don't read, is just listen to the reading and try to find any mistakes. Okay. Try to find any mistakes. Not to criticize, especially when you're not reading, you're just sitting there like an idle critic, right? But for your own sake, for your own sake, paying attention and trying to, I think Cecilia did a great job. That was very nice. Very nice. Josh Pelletier, I'm going to let you go next. Let me find you in our list of students here. Hold on a second. I've got to find you so I can open up your mic. Go ahead, Josh. I think you should be able to speak now. Go ahead and read for us. Good. Go ahead.
In propria venit et sui eum non receperunt, et quod autem receperunt eum dedit eis potestatem filios Dei fieri, his qui crederunt in nomine eius, qui non ex sanguinibus, neque ex voluntate carnis, neque ex voluntate viri, sed ex Deo nati sunt. Et verbum caro factum est, et habitavit in nobis, et vidimus gloriam eius, gloriam quasi unigeniti a Patre plenum gratiae et veritatis. Johannes testimonium perhiberet de ipso, et clamat dicens, hic erat quem dixit, qui post me venturus est ante me factus est, quia prior me erat.
Okay, awesome. Very good. Just about perfect. You made two mistakes, Josh, which both of them were not pronunciation mistakes. I think you saw a word and you assumed that it was a word that you had seen in another place, and you read it and added a syllable to it. Up here, for credunt, go ahead and turn your mic off, Josh. For credunt, you read crederunt, which you got from another verse, all right? So that was just a simple mistake. And then down here, there was one more. I think perhibet, you said perhiberet, which again, that's a form of that verb we saw in another verse. So everything else was perfect. So that was great. All right, so good. So we had two good readers work us through this. Very helpful, very good. Mistakes were just simple things, nothing important. Cecilia's was great, Josh's was great. So very good. You got to hear the reading from others, and now we'll go through it now together. We'll go through it word by word, but keep practicing the pronunciation. It's good to hear it. The other reason why it's good to focus on pronunciation and be really careful with pronunciation is because it helps you to learn spelling, all right? If you pronounce the words really clearly, you can usually picture them in your mind, and that's how you avoid spelling mistakes. Most of the time when people spell badly, it's obvious that they don't even have these words in their heads, right? They don't even have the words in their heads, because the words that they write when they spell are words they've never even seen before. So usually when we have spelling problems, we're just not paying attention when we read, and we're not getting these words clearly in our minds, and that causes us to not know how to spell them when we try to do so. All right, so good. So constantly practice pronunciation. Take your time and go slowly if you're just getting started, and over time it'll get easier and you'll move faster and faster. Don't try to read fast from the beginning. You'll notice here also there's a recording on the page here. I'm not sure if this is actually my voice or somebody else. Let me just see real quick. I'll check it out. Yeah, that's me. So there's a recording here of my voice reading the passage. So if you want to practice, you can listen to that as much as you want. All right. We're going to go through the translation. So again, if you've got a piece of paper, most of the stuff that I mentioned is going to be found written in the lesson. So you're not going to have to worry about that. But I'll make some comments along the way to clarify things which might be helpful. You might want to just jot them down. All right, verse 11. Let's go through this, and I'll open up chat. Chat is only for answers to my questions. If you chat anything else, I'm just going to remove you from the classroom, because I want to get through this and I want this to be useful. All right, any chat that's not answering questions I ask about the lesson, you're just going to be removed. Very simple. So verse 11 here, in propria venit et sui eum non receperunt. What does in propria mean? In propria. Let's try to move quickly through this. So I'm going to get the first few answers and then we're going to move. No, not in the beginning. In propria, not in principio. In propria. This is verse 11. In propria, to his own. Very good. In propria, to his own. The ending is a because it's neuter. It means to his own things. So you might want to add things in parenthesis, all right? To his own things, to his own stuff, things that belong to him, venit. What does venit mean? To his own things, venit. Venit, he came. How do you know to say he came? How do you know it's he? How do you know it's not we came or I came or they came? How do you know it's he came? How do you know that? Just because you saw it in the lesson, or is there a way to identify who it is? The ending. What do you mean by the ending? What about the ending? Who can explain how we know it's he came and not we came or they came? How do we know? How do we know? Just stick to the chat, answer the questions. The ending is masculine. Nope. It's third person. Very good, Adel. It's third person. Okay. So third person, that ending, that T ending here is third person. It could be translated he, she, or it. Okay. He, she, or it, that T ending. Now, how do we know if it's he, she, or it? How do we make that decision? How do we know if it's he, she, or it? It could be any of those three. How do we know that? How do we know that? It's a little more difficult question. How do we know? How do we know? The context, very good, Josephine. All right, we know the subject we're talking about Jesus. And so when we come to a verb like that, and it could be translated he, she, or it, we make the verb agree with the subject, okay? So in propria, to his own things, and remember, if you're going to write things, you don't have to, but if you do, put it in parentheses. So you remember that that's not actually in the Latin text. In propria venit, to his own he came, et sui. What does sui mean? Et sui. His own. Yeah, so propria and sui have similar translation, but they're different parts of speech. Propria is an adjective. Sui is a pronoun. All right. To his own things he came, and his own. Now, sui is different. Sui is different here because it's not neuter, it's not translated things, it's masculine, so it probably refers to people. So et sui and his own, and I would put people in parentheses. It's not actually in the text, but it's an interpretation. And his own people, eum. What does eum mean? Eum. Eum, him, very good. Him. And then we have non receperunt. Non receperunt. What does that phrase mean? Non receperunt. Non receperunt. Not did receive. Yeah. So if you keep the word order, not did receive. If you change it around to make normal English, it would be did not receive. Good. Okay. Both of those are correct. So in propria venit, to his own he came, et sui eum non receperunt, and his own him not did receive. Now, again, I tell you this all the time. If you can keep the translation in Latin word order and just learn to think like that, get used to thinking like that, it'll make your Latin reading in the future much, much easier. There's no need for you to move the words all over the place and try to turn it into clear English translation. You might need to do that if you're translating it for someone else to read. But if you're translating for the sake of Latin studies, keep things in the original word order and just learn to get used to that. Because think about it, when people spoke in the past, when they spoke in Latin, they didn't do all that moving around. They just heard these words and thought of them word by word, just as we do when we listen to English. So when someone said in propria, they thought to his own, venit, he came, et and sui, his own, eum, him, non, not, receperunt, received. That's how they heard it. That's how they thought of it. They didn't say, hold on a minute, wait a minute. Let me move all these words around first before we continue. They didn't do all that moving around and they just listened and heard it and understood it word by word, just like we do in English. So part of learning to read Latin, one of the reasons why people can't read Latin well, one of the reasons why people can't read Latin well is because they do all this translating and they move words all over the place and they try to figure out how to translate things. And there's just no need to do that. You don't need to do all of that moving around and shifting words around. What you need to try to do is read the Latin and just translate it into English as simply as possible, one word at a time. That's the best way to do it. Now, could you come up with a clearer translation, a clearer English by, using different phrases? Or yeah, sure you could, but that's really not our goal in Latin studies. We want to learn to read conveniently, all right? So in propria venit, and you should be able to read this and hear it and just think of the meaning as you read it without really translating at all. In propria venit, et sui eum non receperunt. How many of you can hear that and just follow and say, yep, I got it. I understand what that says. In propria venit, et sui eum non receperunt. There's really no need to even translate once you get used to it, okay? Now, that's the goal. That's the goal of these translation exercises. So for those of you who don't repeat the translation exercises, you just do it one time, you don't follow instructions, you do it one time and submit it, you're not going to be able to understand the language and you're not learning Latin. So make sure when you do the translation exercises, you repeat them and repeat them and repeat them until you can write out the English word for word without looking at any notes or looking at the lesson or anything else. If you do that, if you practice that and repeat it until you can do it automatically, you'll be able to start reading Latin and not need to do all that work of translation, all right? So make sure you take time to repeat those exercises until you can do them automatically. That's the purpose. They're training you to read the Latin. Okay, so don't try to cut corners on those exercises. Let's move on to verse 12. Quod autem receperunt eum, dedit eis potestatem filios Dei fieri. Quote, what does quote mean? Quote. Quote, however many. Very good, Lara. Very good. Everybody's got that right. Quote, quote, however many people, right? We could say that's a kind of adjective. However many, it's understood that we're talking about people. So we could put people in parenthesis when we translate. Quote, quote, however many. Autem. How about autem? What does autem mean? Autem. Autem. However, yeah, so just be careful there because quote, quote, we have however many, and then autem also means however in English. Notice in Latin, there are two totally different words, but in English, unfortunately in English, we've got the same word to express two different ideas, however many and however. The first, however many, is an adjective. And let me ask you this, how can I know that quote, quote is an adjective? How can I know that? How can I know that quote, quote is an adjective? How can I know that? Very good, Lara. We could put thing after it or things. We can do the thing test. That's a good test. All right. Quote, quote, however many things. What part of speech is autem? And please don't guess. Don't embarrass yourself with wrong guesses. Think about it. Take a minute. What part of speech is autem? Think of what the parts of speech are, what they are, and which of the parts of speech is autem. What do you think? Conjunction. Very good. Good, conjunction. Now, sometimes conjunctions, when we think of conjunctions, sometimes it's easy to understand that and is a conjunction, right? Because it joins things together, this and this. But we have to remember that negative conjunctions are also conjunctions. The word autem, however, it has the same idea as but, right? However many, however, but however many received him, even though it's negative, it's still joining things together. It's still joining the sentence parts together. So it's a conjunction, all right? Quote, quote, however many, autem, however. Receperunt. What does receperunt mean? That's right, Jude. What does receperunt mean? Did receive, okay? So his own did not receive him in verse 11. However, verse 12, however, on the other hand, that's the idea with autem, quote, quote, receperunt eum, as many as, or however many did receive him, eum, dedit eis potestatem. What does dedit mean? What does dedit mean? Dedit. He gave, very good. Dedit, he gave. Think of a dedication, something that's given to someone, right? He gave, good. Dedit, he gave. He gave eis. What does eis mean? Eis, he gave eis to them, very good. Dedit eis, and what did he give them? He gave them potestatem. Potestatem, what is potestatem? Power, very good, all right? However many, however, did receive him, he gave to them potestatem. Now, what kind of power did he give them? Power to rule the earth, power to become wealthy, power to kill their enemies. What kind of power did he give them? He gave them potestatem filios Dei fieri. Filios Dei fieri. What does filios mean? Yeah, very good. Okay, so you got ahead of me there. That's good. Filios Dei fieri, but let's look at it one word at a time. Filios. What does filios mean? Sons, very good. Filios. Does that mean that girls can't be saved? The fact that he gives power only to filios? Does that mean that girls are not included in this? Why would it say filios? Why would it say that? Why does it say filios, which is translated sons? Why does it say that? Explain to me why it says filios. Yeah, good. The reason why is because when we have a mixed group of male and female, you know, if we want to be perfectly accurate, we can always say, ladies and gentlemen, he or she, right? We could do that if we want to, but it can be a pain in the neck, especially when we're talking a lot and we've got to say it again and again and again and again and again. So what we normally do, this is just a convention in language. We normally just use the masculine gender to refer to both sexes in a mixed crowd. It's not like some kind of, male dominant thing. It's just a convention. It's just what we do to make speech easier. All right. We use a masculine form whenever we're talking to a mixed audience. Okay. Yeah. That's all that it means. So he gave to them power, Philios, sons, Dei, and we could translate Philios, children, if we wanted to, right? Which would be neutral. Philios Dei fieri. What does Dei mean? Philios Dei. Of God, good, of God. So Philios Dei means sons of God or children of God. And then fieri. Fieri. What does fieri mean? To become. Yeah, that verb, fieri, that's an irregular verb. So in Latin grammar, when you study verb forms, you're going to learn this verb. It's an irregular verb that it's got some wacky forms. You won't find that in a Latin dictionary if you look it up. So he gave to them power, sons of God, to become. So anyone who receives Christ, anyone who receives him, he gave to them power. So it's like a deal he makes with us. If you receive him, he gives you power, and it's a certain kind of power, not power to, win basketball games or make a lot of money or kill your enemies. It's power to become sons of God. What do you think that actually means? What do you think it means to become sons of God? What does that mean? What does it mean to become sons of God? To be his child, to be like him. Yeah, it's interesting that one of you said to be like him, right? Yeah. Okay, so now, do you think it means to become disobedient children? Because children can be disobedient, right? You can have a child who's just a total brat. It's, rejects everything his parents say, everything they do. He disobeys every command, and yet he's still a child of those parents. But that's not what this means. It doesn't mean he gives us power to just become adopted children, right? Adopted children can be evil. So that's not what it means. It means more than that. It means power to become obedient children. That's the idea, right? To be a son is to be obedient, right? That's what it means. If you're disobedient, what does it even mean for you to call someone your father if you don't obey them? Doesn't even make any sense. So when it says he gave to them power to become sons of God, we understand that sons means obedient sons. He gave to them power to become sons of God, obedient, good, pleasing sons of God. All right? Very good. That's right. Okay. So let's move on. He gave to them power to become sons of God. His qui credunt in nomine eius. His qui credunt in nomine eius. What does his mean? What does his mean? Does not mean his. To these. Good. Yeah, to these. You can write to those. That's okay. To these. And by these, he's referring to those who he was just talking about, to those who received him. Okay. He gave to them power to become sons of God. To these people, qui, what does qui mean? Who, very good, Lara. Who, qui is who, to these or to those who credunt. Credunt, what does credunt mean? Who believe, good. When we say the Apostles' Creed, if you say it in Latin, the first word is credo, I believe. He gives the power to become sons of God to those who credunt, who believe, in nomine eius. What does in nomine mean? In nomine eius. Yeah, you could say in the name and put the in parentheses, right? In the name. Okay, in nomine, in the name or in name. And then eius, what does eius mean? Eius means his. Okay, good. Now, let me say one thing about studying this lesson that causes some confusion. Sometimes kids who study this lesson get confused because in this verse, we have the Latin word his, and we have the English word eius, which means his. And so you see his, it looks like this says his, but it says his. And then the translation of this is his. And you can see how goofy that is, right? How confusing that can be. So kids get to the quiz and it will ask them to say what the word his means, and they'll write eius, so it's confusing. So in Latin, let me just type this to make this clear. So just make sure you don't get confused by this, because many students get confused by this. They write to me all angry, saying, why is my quiz being marked wrong? I got this right. And it's because they get this confused, right? You see that Latin his and the English his can cause your brain to get mixed up there, all right? It's confusing. All right, so his qui credunt in nomine eius, to these who believe in his name. Yeah, that's right, Josh. But you can see how that can be confusing, right? On a quiz, you see his and you type eius, where that's not what it's asking. It's asking for you to translate the Latin word his. Very confusing. All right, I didn't make it confusing. It's just in the Latin. So that's verse 12. However many, however, received him, he gave to them power, sons of God, to become, to those who believe in name his. Now, yeah, that makes it really confusing. You say eius equals his equals these. That's exactly what I don't want you to think. They're two separate things, right? They're two separate things. You can lead yourself into a mental meltdown if you don't understand what's going on there. Yeah. Okay. Well, you're being confused because others are chatting things that are actually making it confused. There was a point in the discussion where I made it crystal clear, and then class discussion just blended everything that I said. If you go back up to 1:50 p.m. in the chat where I typed it out, it's nice and clear, the difference that we need to make. I'll put it in words. Oops. I'll type it one more time. Hold on. One second. Okay, don't type any more about that. Leave it clear like I wrote it. All right. The Latin word his translates to English as to these. The Latin word eius translates into English as his. His and his are two different things. Don't get them confused. Okay. All right. Let's go to verse 13. Verse 13, moving on. Qui non ex sanguinibus. Now, qui means who, and it refers back to this same people being talked about here. So we're just continuing this discussion. He gave to them power to become sons of God. To these who believe in his name, qui, it continues to refer back to them. All right? Yeah. So qui means who. Non ex sanguinibus. What does non ex sanguinibus mean? Non ex sanguinibus. Go ahead and translate the whole phrase. Non ex sanguinibus. Not out of bloods. Now, what in the world does that mean? Not out of bloods. What in the world does that mean? So we're reading along through the gospel here. Everything's going nicely. Jesus came into the world. He came to his own. His own did not receive him. However many received him, he gave them power to become sons of God, to those who believe in his name. And then all of a sudden we take this like left-hand turn and say, who not out of bloods. What in the world are we talking about here? What do we mean by blood? We're not just talking about like blood itself, like red blood, right? So don't think about people covered with blood or anything like that. What does it mean? Not out of bloods. Well, Lara, that's a good thought, right? Does it mean like, forced by, physical violence? Like they're people who they don't believe in him because they're threatened with death, right? We might suggest that as a possible option. But that's not how this is normally interpreted. Not out of bloods has to do with the races of people, okay? Yeah, like DNA. That's right, Elise. Okay. It's got to do with with races, like it's not just Jews who can be saved, not just Jews, not just people who come from a certain line or come from a certain blood, right? That idea of descendants, not by family or race, not of bloods. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's how it's always interpreted by the church, right? It's referring to races because remember, in the gospel, we're always dealing with Jews and Gentiles, the Jewish people, as opposed to the other nations. And Christ comes for both, for both Jews and for everybody, right? Not for any one particular race. Not out of bloods, non ex sanguinibus. Okay, next verse. Neque ex voluntate carnis. Neque ex voluntate carnis. Neque ex voluntate carnis. Neque ex voluntate carnis. Make sure you get all the words, Cecilia. Make sure you get every Latin word. Neque ex voluntate carnis. Not out, nor. That's good, Cecilia. Yeah, nor. Because neque doesn't just mean not. Neque actually means and not. Que means and. So neque means and not. And in English, we say nor or neither. Okay? Nor ex voluntate carnis, out of the will of the flesh. Now, I'm not going to pretend I know exactly what that means. We'd have to look that up in a commentary where some teacher in the church explains that. Nor out of the will of the flesh. Okay? Obviously, I know what the will is, and I know what the flesh is, but I'm not comfortable saying I know exactly what that phrase is referring to. Neque ex voluntate viri. Translate that phrase for me. Neque ex voluntate viri. Neque ex voluntate viri. Neque ex voluntate viri. Nor out of the will of man. Yeah, nor out of the will of man. So to those who were born not out of bloods, nor out of the will of the flesh, nor out of the will of man, sed ex Deo nati sunt. What does sed mean? What does sed mean? But good, what part of speech is said? What kind of word is said? Conjunction, very good. Okay, ex Deo, ex Deo. What does ex Deo mean? Ex Deo, out of God. Good. Nati, what does nati mean? Nati, born, right? Think of the birth of Jesus is called the nativity. The nativity, that's derived from this word nati, which means born. And then sunt means are, right? But out of God, they are born. But out of God, they are born. So what do you think that means? What do you think verse 13 means? Jesus gave power to those who believe in him. He gave them power to become children of God. Notice it's talking about children, right? Becoming children of God. Who are not out of bloods, nor out of the will of the flesh, nor out of the will of man, but out of God are born. What do you think that means? Yeah, I know, we're finishing up now. What do you think that means? Who are ex Deo nati sunt. What do you think that means? Ex Deo nati sunt. What do you think that means? Any ideas? Any ideas what ex Deo nati sunt means? Out of God they are born. Yeah, that's what the words mean. What do you think it's talking about? Yeah, Margaret, that's interesting, right? Could mean baptism, right? Baptism, born into heaven, made in the image of God. We're already made in the image of God. That's by birth. So that's already true. but to be born out of God. What in the world does that mean? Not out of bloods, not out of the will of the flesh, not out of the will of man, but out of God are born. So that's a challenge to try to figure out what in the world is verse 13 talking about there. Okay, think about that one. That's all the time we have today, so we're not going to go any further. We'll stop at verse 13. I want to make sure that you guys turn around from these lessons and go back to the online courses and get these assignments done, okay? That's all. So let's chill with the chat. Make sure you're getting assignments done. Make sure you're getting assignments done. Nobody cares if you attend live classes. This is not the real work. What matters is that you get assignments and quizzes completed, that you do the studies and get the work done. The reason why I'm offering these live classes is not because I'm bored and I'd like to just hang out with you every day. The reason I'm offering live classes is I want to help you get the assignments done more easily. That's why we're having these live classes, okay? I want to help you get the assignments done. So go work on the assignments, get translation exercises and quizzes done, get that stuff turned in, get credit for your studies, and we'll keep moving forward. That's all we're going to do today. So I'm going to stop the recording here, stop sharing, stop the recording.